I just want to say that I'm absolutely a massive fan of Google, and I'm just saying because I'm here. But I think when you stand in Dragon's Den and you see so many people with lots of ideas, and clearly at some stage, Google itself was an idea. Somebody had an idea, put the idea to practice, and I think one of the things that I've learned, in fact, watching organizations like Google, that it's not just about an idea. So many entrepreneurs that you meet in life think that success lies because they woke up in the morning, sitting in the bath, and they have that eureka moment. That's not the moment you become a millionaire. The concept is how do you execute that idea? I think Google is a great example of not just an idea, but how you then execute and take that idea to fruition. And I think the thing that I've always been really passionate about business is to execute, you need to find the right people. And certainly for me in Dragon's Den, one of the things that I'm always very conscious of is not to get overly excited about just the idea, but while sometimes other dragons may test the idea where they might want to break it or overly analyze it or get too detailed, what I believe is whatever business proposition that's offered to me, could I make it bigger, smaller, harder, change the color? Yes, I can. But the one thing I can't change is the individual. So when I invest, I typically overly focus on, is this an individual that I believe could be successful? And that's really where my kind of journey started when I first set up my own business. It wasn't that I necessarily had what I think is an amazing idea. My kind of eureka moment was the concept that headhunting in the mid-80s was only available to the elite class of this country. So only chief executives got headhunted, or the chief executive of BA. And I thought, why wouldn't you offer headhunting to the masses? Why shouldn't Google hire a developer and get a headhunter to find that person? And in the mid-80s, that didn't exist. And that was really my idea, bring headhunting to the masses. And I launched a company called Alexander Mann, set up the firm, and literally from the word go, the first year, we took just over £1 million in fees. And by the time I sold the company, we were doing about 130 million in fees. And it became quite a large brand in the UK. But one of the key things that I learned in that business is when you are backing people businesses, recruitment, one of the biggest challenges in that market is people who become really successful. They join you 2 years, they get up and running, they do really well. And next thing you know, you get a knock on the door and says, James, I'm now ready to leave you because I think I've watched what you've done an amazing job. I think I should do this myself. So I thought, this is quite a silly business because literally every year you go 3 steps forward, you take 2 steps back. And literally year in, year out, the same thing happened. And one day I woke up and I thought, I'm never going to grow this into a huge business because in people-orientated businesses, you'll never hang on to these people. And so I came up with a really crazy idea. I thought the next time somebody knocks on that door with that white envelope, I'm going to surprise him. And lo and behold, of course, they did. Knock on the door, James, I think you're a great guy, I love the firm, it's amazing, but it's time for me to move on. And I said, what are you going to do? And they said, I'm going to start my own business. I said, fantastic. I said, but can I tell you something? I said, I'm really surprised. I said, why is it taking you so long? Because in my diary, I'd penciled you in 2 months ago to come in with this conversation. You've obviously had to think about it more than I did. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, because I've been watching you, and as far as I'm concerned, you are absolutely prime ready to go and do this. I said, but can I take you one step further? So when you go and set up on your own, can I give you some advice? I said, Brian, who works with you, has been with you for 3 years, Julie, that joined you about a year ago, and Steve, when you leave, why don't you take them with you? So he's obviously looking a bit confused because he thinks I'm now taking the piss. And I said, one other thing. I said, because I'm sure it's crossed your mind. I said, I was having a quick look at your database and the customers that you've been doing business with. And what I've actually done for you is I've actually taken a copy of the database. Here it is. Take it with you. He said, James, it's taken me a long time to prepare for this meeting. I've been pacing up and down at home thinking, how am I going to tell you this? And you're not taking me seriously. I said, I think you're absolutely wrong. I have never been more serious in all my life. He said, so let me just get this right. So you want me to leave? I'm going to take all the people with me. You want me to take my customers? I said, yeah. I said, there's one more thing. I said, I've worked out roughly, this is going to cost you about 140,000. I said, I'd like to give you the money too. He said, there's got to be a catch. I said, absolutely. I said, I want you to go halves with me. Let's go 50-50. He said, I don't know really. He said, I've never thought about that. He said, do you want half the business? I said, sure. Because if I'm going to give you the clients, I'm going to give you the staff, and I'm going to give you the money, why don't we just go halves? He said, you got yourself a deal. And literally, that was my first deal. Because when you think about it, it sounds stupid, but I know the guy. He works for me. He's been there 3 years. He's very good. Clearly, he's very good. He's now taking that big leap of faith to say, I'm going to leave this corporate work and I'm going to take a risk with my own money, which for me is really important. So by walking into me, he's stepped over that line, and I'm thinking, you know what's going to happen, don't you? He's going to leave. What's going to happen to the people who've been working with him? He's going to take them with him anyway. Those clients, if I was him, what would I do? I'd pick up the phone, I'd call them all. Remember me, used to deal with me, I'm grey, I've now left, set up on my own, and by the way, I'm going to give you 20% discount. He's going to do it anyway. The money I'm risking, I'm matching his money. That was my first deal. And literally, within 3 months, he got up and running and was profitable. And by month 6, I got all my money back. So I came up with the idea, there's lots of people out there, because one of the things that happens, I think, in the UK, in the corporate world, is exactly that. The minute you have an idea, your first reaction is, I've got to leave and do it somewhere else. So I thought, I need to change that principle, because otherwise my business will never grow. And I had an idea that Alexander Mann was literally just one company with one location in Tottenham Court Road. And just like every other entrepreneur, my ambition was, I want to be global. I want to be in every country around the world. But I'd never opened a second office before. So the problem is, I can't do that. But there must be somebody out there who could show me how to do that. Happened to be in America, met a guy, worked for a company called MRI. They had 600 offices. He was the marketing director, been there 10 years. And I went to a conference where he was speaking. He said, I'm sitting there, and he's giving the big spiel about, got this big map on them, all these flags, and we've opened 600 offices. And I'm sitting there thinking, how do you open the second one, let alone, the 600 one? So after the conference, I went up to him and said, hi, I'm James Caan, I'm from London. I said, I'm really impressed with your presentation. I said, can I ask you a really silly question? I said, you've been in this firm 10 years. Have you ever thought about doing this yourself? He said, sorry, you were... So I said, no, I'm being really straight. I said, I run this company in London. We'd like to expand, and I'm looking for a partner to really help me expand that business. Having listened to your presentation, I think you are that man. He said, what's the deal? I said, really simple. I'll put up all the money. You run the business. If it works, I'll lose. If we succeed, we'll go halves. He said, no, I can't do that. My family's here. I've been here 10 years. I'm on the board. Anyway, like any good salesman, I badgered him to death on the phone every day. I said, look, let me fly you over. Brought him over to London, paid for the flights, arrived. And, sometimes you do those silly things that just work. When he arrived in reception, I'd had his business cards printed and left them on reception. So a bit of a humor came in. So I gave him the concept and said, look, I think you've been doing this for 10 years. You're clearly very good at it. But I think it's really time where you should own a part of what you're doing. And long story short, we set up an organization called Humana International, which was basically the kind of international brand for Alexander Mann. So it was our overseas brand. Backed him in 92. By 97, we'd opened 147 offices in 30 countries, and we sold the business. Backed the right guy. Was it the most ingenious idea in the world? No. Just got the individual right. About a year into it, I get a knock on my door. A consultant who's working for me called Rosaline, been there 6 months, not particularly successful. Okay. He comes to me and said, James, I want to have a quick chat. I've been thinking about what I'm doing, and I think Alexander Mann's got all this wrong. So that's quite interesting. I thought I was doing quite well. You've been there 6 months. I said, have you built anything? Well, not really, but we've got it wrong. Okay, let me just, what, you got 5 minutes. Just give us the pitch. She said, I think the kind of whole concept of recruitment is going to change. I think today this business is very much about transactions. I think it's going to be about customers saying, we will essentially outsourced the entire recruitment to one organisation. Now in 95 that sounded a bit kind of airy-fairy because nobody did it. But she, for some reason, when you look at her face, was really passionate that she convinced herself that's where the market was going to go. So I said, so give me an example, what do you mean? She said, well, Vodafone today deal with like 120 different suppliers. They go to Michael Page for one thing, and Adoko for another, and Blue Arrow for something else, and Hayes for something else. Why don't we go to them and say, look, we understand recruitment better than anybody. Why don't you just give it all to us? I said, because Rosalie, because we can't do it. We only deal with one area. She said, the bits we don't do, James, we'll just buy from somewhere else. We'll just own the space. We'll become the gatekeeper. Truthfully, I thought 50-50, will it work? But just listening to her, I thought, you know what? I think she will convince somebody this might work. Anyway, so the next board meeting, I said, oh, by the way, I got a little action at the board meeting. I said, I'd like to back Rosalie to start this outsourcing business. They said, she got any experience? Not really. How long has she been with us? 5 years, 10 years, 12, 6 months. Sorry, and you want to back her to do what? I said, well, I think just hypothetically, just to amuse me, what happens if she's right? What happens if somebody actually hands you a contract at Vodafone and says, take the lot? I said, what would that do to us? So I said, my view is it's a service concept, remember. We're not have to open 100 shops or buy huge capex. There's an office on the 3rd floor that's empty. Let's just give her the floor. Let's give her an office there. And we'll start another business. Let's be really creative. It's Alexander Mann. We'll call it AMS, Alexander Mann Solutions. And she can run it. And within about 5 minutes, he'll say, James, I think you're being ridiculous. We've got to be focused. We know what we do. We understand what we're good at. We don't want to become all things to all people. Our view is no. One of the advantages of owning the majority of the company, you can ignore what everybody says. So I said, thanks for your advice, but I'm going to see Rosalie. I'm going to back her anyway. So I've gone back to Rosalie. I said, look, they thought it was an amazing idea. They're completely behind you. And we're going to give you the opportunity. You can have your own office, and we're going to launch this business. And just as she's like really excited, leaving, she said, oh, by the way, just forgot to mention, I'm only going to do this if I get equity. I said, Rosalie, you haven't made one placement yet. You've been in 6 months. Equity in what? She said, well, I'm not doing it then. Because she knew I'd backed a number of other people. And obviously this whole concept is you've got to own a bit. So literally, she's at the door. I said, okay, tell you what, I'll give you 10%. She said, great, thank you. So I thought, okay. And saw the next day. She said, I'm really excited, really motivated. I know you haven't spent a lot of money, James, but I do need you to make an investment because I want to be called managing director of my own firm. So I want my own business cards. I said, how much does that cost? 43 quid. I said, Rosalie, I think you're going to have to make that investment yourself. I've gone as far as I want to go. You're going to have to swim the second mile yourself. She said, can I expense it? I said, when you make a profit, you can expense it, but today you should pay for it. Anyway, 6 months go by, doesn't make a sale. Banging on every door you can find. Everybody thinks you're crazy. You want me to hand you over the entire recruitment. We don't know you from Adam. You have no track record. You have no reference sites. So at the end of the 6 months, at the board meeting, I'm supposed to give an update. How's your ingenious investment doing? How's she performing? Has she sold anything? I said, you know, these things take a long time. You've got to be patient. This is a long game. This is not about, the same spiel she gave me, I gave it back. Back of my mind, I thought, you know, I'm going to give her 5 more months. Because if I get to the year end and she still hasn't done a deal, now I'm looking a tad silly, really. Anyway, thank God, by month 10, she convinces one company called Fujitsu to outsource their entire recruitment, £14 million contract. So, of course, now I look like a hero. So I go out with her, sit down with the customer, we craft the deal, and they buy the concept. They say, look, you know, we're a technology company, that's what we do. We understand that that's your expertise. And the key issue was, what happens if you can't deliver? And she was really good. She said, look, right now, what do? You go to Adecco, don't you? You go to Manpower. Why can't I do that? Why can't one organization manage that supply, price it correctly, agree the structure, agree the brief, and I'll guarantee you that if I can't fill it, I'll pay whatever the market, but I want all the business. So we got Fujitsu, She then signed up Vodafone and got Deloitte's, got KPMG. At one point, my revenues at Alexander Mann were about 90 million. Hers were 270 million. When I sold, we'd peaked at 130. She was at 380. So 3 times bigger than the business that I thought I was pretty good at running. We separated the company, and I sold my business in '99, sold a small stake to a private equity firm, and we took a minority stake and got 25 million for that. And then a few years later, her division got sold to Graphite Capital for 93 million. So that little 10% actually turned out to be quite a successful deal for her and for me. So I think for me, the key experience, and that was probably one of the reasons why I ended up at Dragon's Den, because I actually do this for a living. So backing people who've got ideas and then working with those individuals to grow businesses is really what I do anyway. So at Hamilton Bradshaw, which is my private equity firm, we have 40 businesses that we control today, which is outside of Dragon's Den, which is simply where I've come across somebody, and it's always that situation. It's not that I had an idea or I was really engaged with some strategy. It was literally, I met somebody, and I thought, God, I like this guy. I think this guy, and it's always, my feeling is never about, I think the dog treadmill is going to revolutionize the world. It's the individual. So even if you take Sammy, why did I invest in Sammy? As she was making her pitch, Peter and Deborah, everybody was like killing themselves laughing because this dog's like they're knackered on the treadmill. Duncan's lying down with Heineken in his hands thinking, what are they doing? And I'm listening to the woman because she's saying, I'm a waitress during the day. In the evening, I go on the web and I sell these treadmills. That year, she sold 23 machines. And I said to her, tell me, Sam, what is it that's making you do this? Why are you doing this? She said, I've got 3 kids, and one of my daughters, Elizabeth, is really smart. She's really bright, and I would love to send her to private school. And right now, as a waitress, I'm never going to get that kind of money. So I've kind of started this little business on my own, and I think if I could sell enough treadmills, I could get Elizabeth into private school. Now, to me, in a way, the kind of product doesn't matter so much now, because she's driven by a goal and a focus that she so believes in that I think she will do whatever it takes. And that was actually when I put my hand up and said, I'm in. And of course, as soon as we came out of the den, Peter Jan said, James, where's your street cred? And Theo said, if anybody buys one of those, I'll eat the dog biscuit. And so I called her in the next day. I got my team at Hamilton Bradshaw together. I said, guys, need your help. Let me introduce you to Sammy, and this is Daffy the dog, and this is the treadmill. I said, we have to find a way somehow, because my good name is at risk, because Peter and Theo are going to track this investment like a hawk, because I made a statement in the den that said, I'm going to make this woman really successful. So I don't care what you do. I don't care if we have to buy them ourselves. We are going to sell. We are going to sell these treadmills. Anyway, bright guys in the room, and somebody came up with the idea, why don't we sell to the Blind Dogs Association? They've got 5,500 dogs. They rehabilitate, they train the dogs, really important. So put them on the whiteboard. Police force, train the dogs, we'll put up there. The customs people do it, all the vets. If you think, laterally, a vet, you take your dog in, dog could be there for 4 days. That vet's got to hire somebody, employ a dog walker 4 times a day at £6 an hour. If he's got 20 dogs that he's looking after, that's actually quite a lot of logistics, aggravation. Our pet now can have the treadmill in reception. He can be lying on his couch with his Heineken, thinking about the world, while the dog's on there doing its thing. So I'm thinking, why would we sell to vets? Anyway, year 1, pre-Dragon's Den, she sells 24 machines. Post-Dragon's Den, with Jimmy C, 493 machines. Last year, year 2, 840 machines. And ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth is now going to private school. Isn't that amazing? So to me, it wasn't really the concept, but because she believed so much in her ultimate goal, where she wanted to be, I think all we've done really is facilitated that. Now, I'm not ashamed to tell you, she has paid me all the money back. and we are now making quite a decent profit. So success for her and success for us. And I think what I've learned is if you are an entrepreneur, one of the things that is quite useful is your attitude becomes quite driven, because for some reason I think entrepreneurs believe they can almost do anything, because in business, as you know, generally if anything can go wrong, it normally does go wrong. And one of the investments I made, where I was going through a couple of years where things were just going amazingly well, every deal I did just worked, and KPMG rang me up and said they got this great business called Benji's. It was a sandwich chain. Of course, I'm an expert on sandwiches, I'm an expert on food, I know everything about that. And they said, James, have I got a deal for you? So Benji's has got like 150 shops, it's got a factory, employs 300 people, it's quite a big brand. And it said it's really cheap. So I go along on Monday, and they said, look, the only catch is you've got to make a decision on Friday. Now, in every lesson I've ever had and everything I've learned about business, what do we say in Dragon? Do your homework, know your market, etc. So what do? I go on Monday, meet the management. Tuesday, I go meet the accountants. Wednesday, I meet the bank. Thursday, I meet the lawyers. Friday, I buy the business. Broke every rule in the book. When I bought the business, the reason why it was cheap, it was losing £100,000 a week. So there was me, every Saturday, cash point, card in, 100 grand in the business for 26 weeks. And so if you can work the maths, 2.6 million quid. And I tried everything I could think of to turn the business around. But it was a bit like the Titanic. It takes too long because it was too big. It wasn't a one boutique where you could go in, you might change the brand or change the stock, but it was the factory, the logistics, the ingredients. And one of the biggest lessons that I'd learned that I miscalculated is when you've got a brand that has quite a strong visibility in the market. So let's say we're selling cheese sandwiches at 140. You think, well, if it's not making any money, why don't you just put the price up? The problem is if I sell at 170, I'm now competing with Eat, because the consumer is quite brand loyal. And the consumer's view is, if I want to pay 170, I'll go to Eat, I won't go to Benji's. If it's 2 quid, I'll go to M&S. If it's 2.30, I'm a Pret customer. So customers fit into price point. So the minute I put the price up of the cheese sandwich, we didn't sell any. Because the next day the customer came in and said, well, I'm not paying that. And people are genuinely that sensitive. So every idea I had didn't work. So come week 26, at the end of the 6 months, I probably made the best decision I ever made in my life, which is actually putting my hand up and said, got this one wrong. Because if I carry on, I'm going to go bust, because I'll probably lose all of my money. I think one of the biggest issues, I think, for entrepreneurship, I think a lot of people, even in this room, sometimes what happens is you get an idea, you become so obsessed with it that whoever you talk to, what do they say? Whatever you do, don't give up, carry on until you go broke. And literally, for me, the smartest idea was actually knowing when to quit. Because that morning when I got up, I thought, you know what, I can't do this. I've tried everything, it doesn't work, I have to stop hemorrhaging. Because if I go to that cash point one more time, you know, they're going to run out of cash. At the rate I'm going, decided to call it a day, and literally handed the keys back to KPMG, who I bought the business from, and said, guys, you can take it. And it was quite interesting that having made that decision, what a relief, because for that period, I mean, I was the most stressed person you can imagine. And in my head, when I decided to give the keys back, the idea was that was it, I'd lost my money, end of story, move on to the next opportunity. And the guy at KPMG said to me, actually, James, before you do that, it's the one thing Benji's does actually have is quite good sites. We had Bond Street, Oxford Street, Tottenham Court Road, Bank. He said, what we could do is, before we put it into administration, we can actually sell the sites. Because those sites, Pret want those sites, Eat want those sites. So why don't we just mail shot all of them and say we've got a site available in Bond Street, make us an offer. So Pret offered 30 grand, Eat offered 50, Subway came in at 80. So of the 150 sites, 100 of them we gave away just as they were, but 50 we got 1.7 million for, just on premiums. So actually sometimes it was smart that had I have actually, so what's the moral of the story? If I'd call it quits by month 4, I probably would have broken even. And I think that was the other lesson, that sometimes when something isn't working, having that ability to be strong enough and cut your losses. So when I look at SME businesses or small businesses, one of the biggest reasons why they fail is because they hang on too long. You know, which for me, nowadays, I have a very clear strategy. If it's going to fail, please make sure it fails quickly, because procrastination is really expensive. So what do I do now? I spend essentially a third of my time at Hamilton Bradshaw with private equity, where I look after our portfolio businesses. I spend 2 days a week with Dragon's Den, a bit of media, a bit of TV, all that kind of stuff. And probably the most interesting part of my life now is 4 years ago I set up the James Caan Foundation. And it really started where I was just like a lot of people sitting there watching TV, and I saw that earthquake in Kashmir where 3 million people just got dislodged because of the earthquake. And as I'm watching this, I'm like genuinely quite taken aback, thinking just in a split second, just imagine 3 million people just kind of lose their homes. It was a Thursday, and that night, for some reason, I couldn't sleep. I was just going through my head. And I got up in the morning, I said to my wife, I'm actually going to go to Kashmir. I'm just going to fly out. I actually want to see what happened. How did this happen? And as I arrive, I can't even begin to explain to you. But if you kind of closed your eyes and visualize, what would the end of the world look like? That's what Kashmir was. As you walk down the streets, there were these 5-story buildings that literally had dropped, where you could see the 5th story, which had become 1 story. Cars literally hanging off cliff tops, you know, people dead with arms hanging out the things, and it was just unbelievable. And you could smell death everywhere. Anyway, so I'm walking around and I'm completely taken aback. I can't believe where I am. And these army people were showing me around, and as I'm going up to the mountaintop, because it's quite hilly, I see all these people wandering around the mountains, and I say to the army guy, I said, what's going to happen to these people? Because they don't seem like nobody's looking after them. And he said, to be frank, James, the flat land is where the vast majority of the people are, and that's where we're going to concentrate. So we're going to get tents, etc. But we can't get to the mountains. It's too hard. It's too expensive. We've got to focus on the ground. And I thought, Jesus, but there's like hundreds of these people. So it's like October, you know. It's going to be 24 degrees minus in like a week's time. And he just casually said, so they'll die. And I thought, wow, it's just unbelievable. Anyway, so while I'm there, I decide that what I'm going to do is I'm going to build houses for the people on the hilltops, because just the idea as a human being, when somebody just says to you very casually, and they'll die, you think, there must be something you can do. And I didn't blame the government, because I can understand there's such a big issue that you can't do it all. So I come back to the UK, ring lots of friends of mine, and said, do you know anyone who's like an architect who understands how do you build houses, you know, in an earthquake kind of environment? And one of my friends knew a guy who just came back from the tsunami, said talk to him, spoke to him, flew him out to Pakistan. He then actually, interesting, used Google Earth to kind of look at the area, look at the terrain, worked out what you had to do, designed the models in the UK. We flew back over there. We found a factory. The factory built the houses. Then I had to get the lorries to physically, because the factory was 300 miles away from the location. So got the factory, made the houses, got the transport, got them up to the mountains. When we got to the mountains, we couldn't take them any higher because the roads didn't exist or they were broken. Had to get 4x4, so the army provided all the 4x4s, got them so far, couldn't take them any further. We then needed mules to carry. I mean, it was just, the point I'm making is anything that could have gone wrong went wrong, because I'm trying to do it from remote control in Grosvenor Street in Mayfair. Not easy. And eventually we decide we've got the house, we have 100 houses that we built, have to fly back. It's amazing. The army said to me, so who do you want to give the houses to? Really silly question, never even thought of it. He said, because there's all these people, how do you select who gets the house? I said, okay, so just what have you got as a list? And he's going through this list. It was just unbelievable, where he said, you know, this family was 6 kids, 5 sons, 1 daughter. All the sons, unfortunately, have died, and she's only got 1 daughter left, so she can't really fend for herself. I think I could give her one of those. Sort of married couple, grandma, grandpa. I think the father had lost his legs because it got crushed in, you know, as a thing. And just imagine going through a situation like that, where you have to decide. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And that experience of, and you can imagine, as I've arrived and I've built the houses and given the houses to these people, just the look on their face. I mean, anything I'd ever done in my life, any deal I've done or any money I'd ever made could not replace that one day of going around and giving keys to these people and saying, you know, rather than you just, because, and the reason why they wouldn't come down, because they felt that if they left their piece of land, somebody would take it. And this little piece of land was something that's all they owned in their life, and that just meant everything to them. So that kind of taught me that actually entrepreneurs, we can do a lot more because there are skills that you acquire just in terms of mindset. So because of that experience, you know, I now do the Big Issue, that I'm chairman of Big Issue, and I'm quite involved with homeless in this country, because when you sit there and think about it, why should we in Britain, you know, we're quite a sophisticated race, we're quite a developed economy, why should people have to sleep on the streets? It's almost kind of ridiculous when you think about it. I think what the Big Issue does is actually quite a good concept, because what it's saying is we don't want people to beg, we want them to be entrepreneurs. So homeless people come to the Big Issue every day, we sell the magazine to them for 75 pence, and they go out and sell it for £1.50, and they keep all the profits. So actually, as an idea, I thought it was a fantastic idea. We sell, I think, 116,000 copies a week, and my objective, and since I've become chairman, my idea was in 18 years this business actually is not that profitable. I thought what I'd like to do is in my first year I want this business to make £1 million profit. So I spent a day with one of the homeless people and said, show me what you do. So I literally stood in Cavendish Square with him, you know, as he's selling his Big Issue. And, you know, entrepreneurial mindset, I'm standing there and I notice that for every 4 people that walk past and give him money, only one of them takes the magazine. So that's interesting. So we're selling 116,000 copies a week. That's with 3 people not taking it. All I need to do is get 2 out of the 3 to take the magazine. I've quadrupled my sales. And actually we'll make a profit. And that £1 million, I can now support more homeless people. So just that little twist of educating the consumer to say, please, by you not taking the magazine, you're turning him back into a beggar. Because actually he's now begging, isn't he? Because he hasn't sold you anything. So by changing that, phenomenal. Secondly, my first board meeting, I asked him a question. I say, we sell it for £1.50. There's 8 people in the room. I said, can somebody give me one reason why it shouldn't be £1.70? So I go around the room. Nobody has a response. So I said, I think that's decided then. It's £1.70. So I said to the finance guy, 116,000 a week times 20p is roughly how much? It's 20 grand a week. So 20,000 times 52. Bingo, there's £1 million. To the finance guy, what will it cost me? How does my cost go up? Do I need more people? No. Do I need more infrastructure? No. So it's just the cost of the magazine. And how much is that? 8p. So actually, roughly going to make £500,000. So just by doing something really simple, the amount of money that we'll make, that extra £1 million, the impact that we'll have to more homeless people, and that to me I find really fascinating, where entrepreneurship can move into kind of social entrepreneurship, where you can use that expertise, because all the people I meet in kind of charitable organizations are great because they're there because they got obsessed with the idea. But do they have what it takes, that kind of DNA of business? Probably not. So I'm kind of applying that business concept and ideas to different type of charitable organizations. And it's amazing that just the simple things you can do that literally transform some of those organizations, because they're things that they haven't really thought of. So kind of 2 days a week doing that. And I must admit, that side of it has probably given me more of a buzz and probably more experience of business, because some of the issues that I face, whether it's with the Big Issue or with Bosnia or with Kashmir, I can actually apply a lot of that experience in the businesses that I'm involved with, because you're going into an organization where you're challenged with a problem, And you've got to find a way, and you have to think outside the box. So, you know, there's no reason why I think anybody in this room couldn't apply some of the things, because giving back is not always about money. You know, so a lot of the stuff that I do isn't about writing a check, but it's actually using the things that have helped me get where I am, using your expertise, your knowledge, especially nowadays. I think technology, I mean, somebody pitched me the other day, which I thought was quite an interesting idea, which was, you got a village in Bombay or India somewhere, and a lot of medication just doesn't exist because they don't have the technology, they don't have the hospitals, they don't have all that machinery. But telemedicine, where literally you can use a video camera to diagnose somebody. Here, a guy sitting in London, you've got a little shack in a village somewhere. Using technology, you could diagnose that person actually quite accurately just by using a phone and a camera that enables you to show those visuals to somebody sitting in the UK. And this guy's got a database of 470 doctors that he's approached and said, would you give up 2 hours of your time every week to sit in a room with a camera where you could advise people on the ground in these villages? And he's got 470 people, and he's just got this rota where he's showing how it's done. I thought it was an amazing idea. And just think, what does it cost? Nothing really. How much is a camera? Mobile phones are more popular in some of those countries than are literally in the UK. So very cheap technology, very easily accessible. But you imagine if you're in some remote part of Africa, in some village, and somebody's got an illness, the chance, and that's why even something as basic as malaria is still probably in the world today, is still the biggest killer. And yet, for pennies, you can get a cure. So, you know, that's, for me, just as an entrepreneur, realize that actually there are things you can do where sometimes we think that some of the issues of the world are so big that we can't do anything because maybe we haven't got the time or the money. But actually, just a little bit of thought process, when you look at some of these issues where organizations, groups of people get together, literally you can make profound changes to society that I think you'd be very surprised at. So that kind of gives you a little bit of flavor about what that bloke at the end who strokes his beard in Dragon's Den does. But maybe I can just open it a few minutes for some Q&A if you'd like. I do passionately believe in that, because I think in order to be effective, you've got to be able to bring your dog to work, and I think clearly Google do that. I think work-life balance to me is what it means to you, because you know I'm a bit sad because I work 7 days a week, I work 18 hours a day. I'm in the office at 7:30. I don't get home till midnight. I'm there on a Saturday. I'm there on a Sunday. So talk me through the work-life balance. And the reason why do I do it? Because I really enjoy it. So I think you know everybody has a view where you know I kind of work hard, but then I play hard. So I do it differently. So last week I was in Saint-Tropez on the boat for 7 days, just cruising around. So I'm back this week. I'm back next week, and then I'm off to Monte Carlo. I'll be there for another 10 days. So when I'm here, I'm really focused, but then I take lots of breaks because I need that idea. So I think work-life balance is where you are in your life. You know, to some people like me, the idea of maybe finishing at 5 or whatever doesn't work for me. And I think entrepreneurs generally, I think we're all the same. I think we're all mad. You know, we spend too much time at work because we're driven. So I think, you know, I think the entrepreneurial community is probably quite unique because they don't have the work life, because they are just so obsessed with where they're going. Because it was my first board meeting, in a way I was just testing to see what response I'd get. And I thought 20p, and I picked it quite carefully, I thought was almost a no-brainer. And I think what you do is you let it go for 6 months, because what I would then do is I wouldn't actually put it up to 2 quid. I'd put it up to 185, because everybody would give you 2 anyway, and nobody would take the 15p. So I have got that thought process, but I thought, do it gradually. Harvard as an institution was, without a doubt, I mean, it really was the best institution in the world. I think for me, because I didn't finish school and I didn't take any qualifications, when I'd sold my company and I was sitting at home watching Neighbours, and, and I was literally, and I know it sounds really ridiculous, I was actually writing my CV because I thought, I've got to do something. And as I'm writing my CV, it says education, kind of said none. And I thought, maybe that's what I should do. I think I need to, you know, and I've got 2 girls and I'm trying to lecture them about how important education is and you need good grades and you've got to do well. And then I'm writing a CV and it's got blank. So I thought, actually, I need to go back and maybe, I suppose it was curiosity. You know, what did I miss out? Why do all these people become so obsessed with their degrees? And because I had a little bit of cash at the time, I thought, if you had money, where would you go? And I thought Harvard seemed like a good idea. And then he bought it. No. And so I did the course. And I suppose being serious, that there was one bit that I thought was really clever in the way that they taught. So basically the structure of the course was, in the mornings you do case studies on companies. So they say, let's look at a company, it could be American Express, let's look at the management, look at the balance sheet, the vision, the strategy, the product, etc. Kind of get that, understand that. But in the afternoons, we did countries. So we'd say, let's look at India. And the way Harvard taught, which I thought was unbelievable, is they taught you about countries the same way that they teach about companies, which as entrepreneurs you get straight away. So they say, okay, China, who's the management? Let's look at the board. So let's look at the president. Who is he? What's his values? What's his views? Who's he got around him? Let's look at the balance sheet. What's the kind of natural resources of this country, which is the balance sheet, really? What's its GDP? What kind of productivity does it? What's its GDP level? Who is its partners? And I kind of learned more about the global economy in that environment because we had 147 offices in 30 countries. And I remember when I was at Harvard, I was going through the list of offices that we had that I should never have gone into. Because the truth is, I knew nothing about it. What I learned about the dynamics of those economies, because when I opened those offices, it was because I was looking at a map and I was putting these needles with little flags in, saying we need one there, we need one there, that one looks really good. But actually, half of them, we didn't make any money because we didn't think it through carefully. And why did we do it? Because one of our competitors were there. But actually, if I'd followed what I was taught, I probably wouldn't. And I played the 80-20 rule, that 80% of my revenue came from 20% of the offices, and 80% of them didn't make any money. So I probably would have been more effective, I think, just by being more intelligent about it. But with CSC and woodwork, it's kind of difficult to do that. Anyway. Funny enough, a journalist asked me that question, you know, where will you be in 10 years' time? And I said, if I'm really honest, I would love to be exactly where I am now. I'm really happy where I am. I love what I do. I actually wouldn't change anything. I think I've got that kind of balance where, you know, I do a bit of business, I do a bit of media, I do a bit of philanthropy, and I think that spread really keeps me happy. So if I was still doing this 20 years from now, I think I'd be a happy man. I know it's not what you want to hear, but literally the first time we see that person is when he walks up the stairs. And the reason that is if you ever notice, the cameras always focus on our faces because they want that expression of what your first impression of that person is. And so the guy comes in, so you're a normal individual, you walk into a den, you've got 6 cameras, lights everywhere, and there's these 5 people sitting there staring at you. You know what, it doesn't feel great. And sometimes, because I've tried it sometimes when we're messing around in the den, you know, we're waiting for the next guy to come in, one of us will go and just take the mickey and pitch the ridiculous pitch the guy did before. Sorry, can you edit that? So, you know, and I've stood there, and actually it feels weird because in a way what you'd really like is you'd like something to lean on or sit on a stool. But when you're standing there, it's like, where do I put my hands? And a lot of people don't have props. And literally, you're standing there, and you know, Deborah will come in with a question, and Peter will come in with, And of course, because of the way the show's made, we all literally fire questions at the same time because it's great TV. No, and I think it's hard. I think it's really difficult. And I think, you know, I've watched literally grown men stand there, you know, and they just go silent. You know, his throat just seizes. You know, forget about asking the same question. Some of them can't even get the words out because it really is genuinely that tough. And I don't know if you sometimes notice where the cameras go on that. There was a guy in this series where, you know, he's pitching away and he's really, really nervous. And as I'm looking at his face, there's a droplet of sweat just coming down his face. And I'm finding it really hard to concentrate because I can see it's going to drop. So I said to the guy, the cameraman, I said, Dave, do me a favor, could somebody give him a tissue? And in Dave's ear, the producer said, no. So I thought, whatever. Anyway, so as I've come out, I've had a real guy. I said, guys, that was really bad. He said, but it made great TV. I think, you know, actually, I think as a business model, you know, I think it clearly is very successful, does very well. And I think in some of the areas that it's diversified into, you know, you see so many different products, whether it's the phone or Google Earth or the map, etc. You know, to be honest, I think it probably is doing what I would do. You're trying different markets, different products, different services. You know, there are clearly with the brand, I mean, I think the key issue to me is the brand. You know, that brand, because it's so generic, can be almost used in so many different areas. And I think I'm sure, I have no doubt that in your kind of research and development space, there must be 20 other ideas that are currently being explored, developed, evaluated, which is what you would do. I think because you have that clear market leader position, I think the only thing you have to be very sensitive about is don't ever underestimate your competition. You know, and I think in every business I've ever been in, sometimes when I reflect back, the mistake that I've made is I've become too complacent. Because when you are that successful, it's very easy to forget that everybody else is watching you a lot closer than you're watching them. There are far more people who study Google than Google study them. So I would just, you know, for me, just be very sensitive, because I have seen you get knocked off your perch quicker than you think. I think if you look at Microsoft, you know, kind of lost its way a bit, you know, and there are other organizations that at one point, I mean, they were so dominant that really Google should never have existed, in my opinion, because Microsoft should have, it was the natural thing for them to do. But when you look back, how stupid was that decision? But, you know, complacency, it's the same issue, isn't it? You're sitting there, you're king of the world, you've got everything, and you think you've arrived. But actually, everybody else is biting away at what you're doing. And I think, to me, that's always the key, whether you're an individual or an organization, you know, whether you're in a job, there are other people who, frankly, want that job more than you do. You know, you're number one. There are more people who'd like to be in that position than the way you're looking at it. So, you know, I think when you're that successful, you know, it's a bit like me. When I look at myself and say, you know, what is it that motivates me? The actual answer is the fear of failure. It sounds weird, but that's exactly how I feel. Because you get somewhere and you think, oh my God, what would happen if I lost it? Because I absolutely am convinced that I could lose it all tomorrow. Because no business is infallible. You know, if you look at some of the crazy things that happen in this world, whether it's, you know, the dust cloud, or, you know, some glitch of technology, or the Chinese saying, you know, we don't believe in what you're doing. Something happens. You know, remember that example where you had Ratner's, that was an amazing jewelry brand. You know, it was a huge business. And the guy went up, just like me, he's making a speech, and he said, oh, you know, we sell crap. And that was it. You know, a brand that had been around for 100 years, had like 400 shops in every single high street, multi-million-pound business, within 3 months crashed. Because he just made the most fatal error, overly confident, overly arrogant, said the wrong thing, one statement, and the media just destroyed it. So, you know, to me, complacency, I think, is quite key. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. It's been great being here. Thanks a lot.